So welcome back to this second video. In this episode we're going to actually compose a melody, then we're going to clean it up in the software, in the digital audio workstation. In this case I'm using FL Studio, and then in further episodes we'll look and maybe we'll harmonize it in very basic ways, and then we'll look into more complex harmonies and arrangements for the same melody. We'll look into variations, we'll look into double voicing, we'll look into counterpoint eventually based on the same melody. So let's get right into it. To start with, again, you need to choose a tempo, and here I'm going to just do 4/4 because it's quite straightforward and the most common tempo. So 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. You could also count 1 2 3 4, but it's easier if you just go 1 2. So okay, so that was a very simple one. Oops, why is this not working? Okay. Okay, let's see if that one works. We'll do a couple more and then we'll just clean it up in the software. Well, actually, I need to record this. But you see, this is something that you need to start doing, is just simply test different melodies, just jam with them and see which ones you like. And then once you like, you just record several, and then when you're satisfied, then you just keep with whichever one you prefer. So let's start again. Let's try some other ones. 2 1 2. Let's see. Okay, let's try this one. So one nice thing to do when you have melodies is to compose one with quick notes and one with longer notes. And you see that very, very often in all kinds of styles in classical music. You have a first melody that is very quick, for instance, where there's a lot of notes, and then a second one that is longer, with longer notes and a little bit less rhythmic. And the alternation between the two usually works really, really well. So when you compose melodies, just alternate between very quick paced ones with a lot of notes and ones that are more calm. And the contrast between the two makes for a very good mix when you're composing later on. Now, don't worry too much if, for instance, you compose things, they don't sound really good, because you, as I said, you can always edit them later on. So right now I'm going to go into the editing phase, and yeah, I'll just pause this for a minute. Well, maybe I'll just go right straight into it. So let's listen to some of these. Okay, so I'll just show you quickly how I do this, but then I'll pause the video, I'll work off camera, and then we'll go back once all the melodies are sort of cleaned up, because otherwise you're just going to watch me, it's going to be boring. So let's see. So let's first check the tempo here. And this... Bum, bum, bum. Still too fast. That's about right. So now you need to take the melody that you've done completely without any tempo reference and put the notes back, keeping the original tempo that you had in mind. Of course, I could have done it with using the metronome, but sometimes it feels like you're less free, and in order to change tempo, and you're less inspired when you have this metronome there. And then it's of course much more work to clean it up. But you know, it just depends how you prefer to work. Now, don't worry about the note lengths here. We'll just set them really on the beat and even shorten the notes. And we can always work on the length of the notes later on. So bum, bum, ba, ba, bum, bum, bum. And it's really important to sort of have a rhythmic ear where you can because otherwise when you're cleaning up your melody you might not keep the same rhythm, and it's really important to keep the same rhythm, because rhythm is a big part of what makes a melody what it is. So let's see. Perfect. Bum, bum, ba, ba, bum, 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 bum. Bum, ba, da, bum, bum. Okay, so here you see I've messed up a bit the rhythm, but I know what I had in mind. Ba, da, bum, bum. There, that's one string. Cool. now let's do the other one. And now you see, when you improvise, when you compose, especially when they're short melodies, when they're longer melodies, you don't have to worry about this, but you notice here that basically this melody, this part of the melody, is almost exactly the same as this one. Why so? And I can even just copy paste it. I don't even need to recompose it. Because repetition is a big chunk of good melody composing, actually. Otherwise it's called free jazz, which is also fine. But if you're composing classical music and you have themes and you have melodies that sort of that you want to compose that stick in the mind, then repetition is a very important element. And you have to really keep a balance between repetition on the one hand and originality and new material on the other hand. And by having this same reference here, it allows me to help the mind remember the melody more easily. And you also see that instinctively, also naturally, I've kept the same rhythm here and here pretty much. Bum bum pa pa bum bum bum, and here bum bum pa pa bum pa pa bum bum. It's very similar. These two first measures are the same, and that's also not by chance. It's also by design. When you're composing melodies, when you're listening to melodies, you'll often hear that rhythmic elements that you start with become building blocks for what you're going to do later on. You may use them as an accompaniment later on, you may use them for variations, but it's really important to keep rhythmic patterns and melody patterns in your mind when you're composing, and not just compose stuff randomly. And that's something that you acquire gradually. What I advise you to do, for instance, is just sing in your shower, improvise melodies in your shower, and try to, for instance, repeat twice the same melody that you sung. So if you sing like la 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 la, repeat that a second time. La 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 la. You need to train your mind to be able to recall something that you just came up with a second time, so that it really sticks in your short-term memory and you can reuse it as a template for composing later melodies. Now, bum bum ba-da-dum bum 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 ba-da-dum bum bum ba-da-dum. Bum ba-da-dum bum. Yeah, that's it. Oops. There. Ba-da-bum-bum. That is. Okay. See here, I messed up the rhythm that I had in mind, but I kept it in my memory, so that I know what I intended when I actually improvise this, and that's really, really important. Ba-da-bum-bum. Now here, this is supposed to be a bit snappier, and sometimes you don't have to be exactly on beat in classical music, especially because it gives that kind of natural feel. Now here, this is a bit unnatural. Perfect. So you see how I edit this? I listen to the melody, I try to remember then what rhythmic pattern I had in mind, and then I adjust it to the tempo and put it on beat. Of course, that's one way of working. You can also just put the metronome on, but like I said, if you're sticking with one single tempo, then it might hinder your natural sort of improvisation and creativity, which is why I prefer not to have the metronome and just compose freely, because I have anyways these two notes as a reference point for my tempo and my beat. And it's a little bit more editing work, but then also as far as creativity, I can slow down, I can accelerate. It doesn't bother me that much, whereas if I have the metronome, I'm kind of limited. So I'm going to go off camera now. I'm going to edit all of this, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to test some melodies, see what we keep, see what we discard. So talk to you later. So welcome back. Here are all the different melodies that have been rearranged to fit the grid. So let's get into quick harmonization here. So just a bit of theory here. In C major, let me just grab these melodies and put them at the octave. Okay. So in C major, the most fundamental chord is of course the C, but virtually 99% of all melodies that you'll have in C major, you'll be able to harmonize with just 3 chords, just 3. The first one, fundamental, then you have the G chord and the F chord. You basically don't need any more than those 3. The other chords are there to add tension, color. So any melody that you'll find in C major, you can arrange with those 3 chords. Of course, it may not sound like the original. It may not have the same color, for instance, but it'll work in terms of pure harmonization theory. So when harmonizing, first, it's very just understand that from the most basic perspective, even if you just stick to C major as a chord, it'll work. It'll not sound very good, but it'll work. Simply because it's the root chord. So let's give this a go. So now there's a question of tempo here. You have to sort of listen to the rhythmic inflection points of your melody and see if you want the chords to be synchronized with those or maybe desynchronized. And that's also very important because it adds a rhythmic dimension to the accompaniment. So bum bum bada bum bum bum. So here you see we start with the G, so of course root chord, but then we go F, G, A, F. So that's clearly an F chord if we want to be. And you can play around here with when you switch between the chords to add a rhythmic element to the accompaniment. Instead of being on the beat. Like this. See? What you hear is bum bum bada bum bum bum. But So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very basic. The rhythmic pattern of the melody is very basic. Like you have no notes that are strong notes that fall on an off beat. They're all on beat. Bum, 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 for instance. And all the other ones are notes that are kind of on the side here as decorative, or, you know, like just going about. But if the accompaniment, in the accompaniment, you can be a bit more rhythmic. When analyzing what chord you should play, the most easy way to do it is just check which note is playing. Here it's a G. Because it's the beginning of the melody, it would be weird if you put a G chord. You could, but normally the first chord is always the fundamental, so that the ear of the listener sort of knows, okay, this is the bass, this is the where you go, where you start from, and then you shift to other chords. Now here we have a choice, like for instance F, G, A, F. That's clearly an F chord, because you can just see that it's just two notes of the triad here, of the three notes out of the chord. It's just the C missing here, but you know, it's clearly an F chord. Alternatively, it could be a D minor as well, but we'll stick to the three main chords that I presented, C, F, and G to begin with. Then this one is a bit more tricky, because you see bum bum bada bum bum bum. It's a G, but it could also be a G chord. Why not? Now, the reason why I wouldn't put G there is because G is typically the chord that you use at the end of a phrasing before that leads on to the C chord again. And if you alternate too much between G and C in short sequence like that, it really shortens artificially the movement of the harmony, and like cuts up your melody into tiny segments where it's root chord, you go away from the root chord, G chord, resolution, C chord. And if you do that within just 4 beats and then you repeat that, it sort of artificially cuts your melody, and you don't have that nice little melodic line. You don't have that feeling of the melody sort of advancing. It chops it up a bit more. So I would keep it like this. Alternatively, what you could do is use some sus chords or add 4 chords. So instead of having a pure C chord, you can add an F or a D instead of an E here. This is what it sounds like. Or this. Now that sounds a bit less good. Why? Because here what's nice is you have the movement is from C going to F and then shrinking back into C. You see gradually, like one note budges towards C again, but the F stays, and it has, if you do this, it's a bit more repetitive. See, if you do this, there's more movement in the way you harmonize it. And again, you can do the same system here now. Now, this is an interesting movement. If you look at the notes, most of them are from C major. E, C, E, C. Although, but at the end of a second part of a melody like this, typically because before the repetition here, before you repeat the first sequence, you would have a G chord, which leads you back to C. And even though there's only the D is played only twice here and it's surrounded by a C chord, it'll still work. And especially because there's this F here. So if you add the other parts, it's a G7, which leads even stronger to a C chord because it's more tense. So let me check this. And maybe we can actually delay the chord until the very end, like this. And here we can repeat the F chord again. Let's see. And feel free to sort of modify your melody sometimes, because if some notes don't feel right to you, don't think that your melody is now, when you've arranged it, it should be carved in stone and never budge. Sometimes the harmony will actually help you revise your melody and vice versa. So why did I do this? Because it's a bit more dynamic. You see, it doesn't sound like an end of a phrasing. If I put C here, the last note is C, which means it sounds more like a resolution, like the melody is done, finished. Whereas here it's more open, it leads on to the second repetition. And you could maybe actually reverse these two. Let's try that. And trying is absolutely necessary. Don't be hard bent on any one solution. You need to try things out also. Let's see. Now, why does that work better? In my mind, at least to my ears, because here in this descending pattern you have F, E, D, which is much more related to a G chord than an F chord. And here you have a let me see if I can show you on the piano. You have a F major 7 chord. Probably you don't see it. Let's see. Just get rid of a few things here. Yeah. So you have F, A, C, and E. So let me go an octave higher. See, that makes more sense. The E here is like a 7th chord when you add the F chord. And that gives it really nice color, and it can also lead back to C even though it's not as strong, and you'll see that will then the second part is just going to be the same. So like this. There. And actually, let's try that. Now here I've introduced you to something new. It's called a bass movement. The movement of the bass, where the root chord, I'm not even using root chords here, maybe I should have, so it's easier for you to follow. And actually let's just do that so that you can easily see what I've been doing, and then I'll explain why I'm using inversions. Sorry about that. Not a very good structured teacher yet, but we'll get there. Oops. Copy this. Ooh, all of it actually. So twice the same melody. Okay, so here I'll transform all of these into root chords just so you can hear the difference. And here I'll actually just put C. This is already in a root. This just goes here. So that's the basic harmony, but when you introduce these sudden movements, very sudden movements, jumping between the fundamentals of the chord, it's sometimes way too shocking, and it's not very pretty to the ear. And whereas when you play around with inversions, you can get bass movements that are not as wild, don't shock as much, and have smooth transitions between the different chords. And then you can also allow yourself these little freedoms here, where instead of using the root of the C, you put a F chord, an F note here, and then that moves along nicely to the E. So and here you have what's called a nice little bass movement upwards, where the melody goes downwards, and that's always very nice in composition. And if you just research voice leading as in arranging music for 4 voices, you'll get a lot of information on how you should make the different voices move one with respect to the other. I'm not the best at this, but when we get later on beyond harmony into arranging with the double voice, then we'll get into that. So now you see that with a simple melody in C major, I've used only 3 chords, and that's enough to arrange nearly any and all melodies. Now I'll just do the second here. I'll do the exercise for this melody as well, and then I'll wrap up and continue in the next video, so it's not too long. So let's see, I'll be a bit faster in doing it. Okay, so here if you look closely, this second melody is actually a variation on this one. It is exactly the same rhythmic pattern, pam pam pa-da-dum pam pam, just with different notes. And typically what happens there is that's the second melody that you hear after the first one as a kind of a nice way of changing things around. But harmonically speaking, it means that since this melody is listened to at a later stage in the composition, you're not forced to start with a C chord. And in fact, I would discourage doing it, because if you look at what notes are played later, then you have a G chord here. Because it's B, C, D, B, which is, you have two notes out of the G chord here. So what's more interesting is to actually play a F chord here. And I'll do the same exercise, just doing fundamentals, like in the root position, the chords in the root position, and then I'll change them around and do some let's see. Yeah, see, that works very well. What you could have done is to play a C chord and a G. I'll harmonize it down here actually. But in my mind, it'll be much less pretty. See? Simply because, again, going from C to G to C is a very basic progression, which signals normally the end of a phrase, and again, it chops up your melody into little pieces. And Beethoven actually uses that a lot in some of its compositions, but it's usually towards the end when you have to do bum 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 bum, you know, very quickly switching between C and D and C and C and G, C and G, C and G. But here that's not at all the effect that we're after. This is really a variation where you want sort of a fresh kind of feel for the second time the melody comes in with a variation. And here you can revert to the way that, because this is actually a repetition of the first melody. It's exactly the same actually, so you can just arrange it the same way. I could have done it differently, but then I would have to use minor chords, for instance, to make it more interesting, and we're going to go into that later. Right now I'm sticking to 3 chords, that's it. And again. Root, and then we'll play around a bit later. Okay, so that's the basic harmonization in root position, and now how do you make it a bit more interesting, a bit less abrupt? Oops. I forgot one note here along the way. Don't want that. So we're going from F to C. So how about we just create a little movement here where you go up like this. See, here I'm changing things around a bit. I changed the chord from a C with an F, just because I like this up and down movement of the bass. I'm aiming at going towards an F chord in root position, and I start with a C, then I have to go, then I'm playing an F. And instead of playing it up here, I can initiate this movement downward back towards this F, and then here, instead of putting this chord, which would be a bit too, well, let's try it. So it works, but I find that it's too specific. I have no other words to qualify it. Too specific harmonically. It really sounds too much like a G, which leads back to a C normally. Whereas if I color it differently, then it'll lead nicely into this chord. Or I could even do this. Let's try that. But I prefer it this way, just because it sounds better. But that's stuff that you have to test, and sometimes that's the best way to do things. Again here, same thing, pam pam pam, and this is normally an F as well, but I'm gonna put in a G there just to have some progression and something more interesting for the ear. And this is a G. Okay, let's try that. Like this actually. This works much better. Here's another thing that you might learn later on. It's sometimes when the melody again is too much on the beat, bum 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 bada bum, it's quite boring. And you can make it interesting by having a rhythmic pattern in the harmony, just like here, but which sort of almost delays the moment, like the harmony is either a bit too soon, like comes sooner than the melody, or a bit later. And that can create really interesting, let's see. Oops. Yeah. Or you can try the opposite, like this would work as well. Let's try this. That works as well. I don't know which one I prefer actually. Maybe I'll try this one again. There. And here I'm sort of keeping this upward movement, whereas I go up, down, up again. I'm keeping the F, G, A, B, C, and that's quite nice. It sounds much better that way, I find. And here I'm cheating a bit, of course, because I'm not strictly speaking sticking to these three chords, because I'm adding notes outside of the root chord. But you get the idea now, huh? you can really harmonize just about any melody with just those three when it's in a major tonality. So hopefully you found it interesting, and in the next video we'll look into, well, plenty of things like variations on the harmony, where you can substitute minor chords for major ones to add even more color. And then we'll get into also putting second voices to all of this. I mean, yeah, it'll get more complex as we go, and then also eventually taking these melodies and making a sort of an orchestral arrangement out of this. So I hope you're enjoying this video series. Let me know what you think, and talk to you next time.